Okay, so I I mean it goes back to very early childhood when I started having like just feeling like I wanted to be a boy. I vocalized it. I would say things like, "Oh, I'm half girl, half boy." And in like TV shows that I watched, like I always idolized male characters and I never really like related to female characters. Um, and as I got older, and sort of entered into like eighth grade, I sort of adopted like kind of a male persona, to be honest. And, it was like kind of disconnected from who I was, but at the same time, it was me. It was like, I don't know. The desires to like be a guy just grew and I started basically cross-dressing or like I cut my hair really short and I was basically trying to look like, a 13-year-old boy and I just felt like all of the other, middle school girls were just expressing themselves and acting very differently than how I naturally wanted to express myself. Um, and so that led to me kind of questioning, like, am I gay? Why do I want to cross dress all the time? I know this isn't normal. Like, I just it was a very confusing time for me. And then I go into high school, I kind of decide, like, okay, I'm gonna try to be more girly because, like, high school is a lot more different than middle school. And I didn't exactly like dressing up as a boy all the time and like that didn't exactly like do any favors for my social life. So I basically was like, I'm just gonna start dressing up more girly again. And I was spending a lot of time on like Tumblr. And when I was on Tumblr, I came across this term called genderqueer. And that kind of opened up this concept of like being non-binary and or like somewhere in between male and female. And I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, like that's the answer. Like that's exactly how I feel. And I'm so relieved that like I'm not the only one. I felt so isolated and weird. And now I know that there are lots of other people that feel this way. And I just, I basically just adopted that label for myself, but it wasn't that serious. But then, being as chronically online as I was, and just, I was also just depressed and dealing with a lot of like, you know, mental illness. And the, I basically, the more time I spent online reading about the gender stuff, people, I read more about like being female to male and what that looks like for people. I was very intrigued with watching like gender transition videos and it's just like learning about how, oh, you can be gay or straight, like it's not the same as your gender identity. So then I started asking myself like, okay, am I this? Because I want to cross dress like all the time. Like I would always rather wear men's clothes than women's clothes. Like women's clothes are like okay, but I just want to cross dress all the time and have my hair short and you know still felt pretty similar to how I felt in eighth grade with the cross dressing. And then I started hearing people say like if you are trans, like if you have like a an opposite gender identity and you don't transition, then you might kill yourself. Um, and just reading about like the suicide rate and just feeling very like it just became a lot more serious very quickly. Just kind of considering what I thought the stakes were because I was already quite depressed and I had experienced suicidal thoughts before, so it's not like, you know, I was in a pretty mentally and emotionally vulnerable place. And I thought maybe this is why I'm so miserable. Um, if being, if having a gender identity, if being transgender, but suppressing it causes all of these problems, then like maybe if I just, you know, accept that I am a trans man and start living out that way and start pursuing a gender transition, then, a lot of my problems will just go away. Not all of them, but it felt like a big thing to do. I didn't like myself, so I really like the idea of becoming someone else was really appealing, and there's really no more powerful way to do that than to change your gender. So, yeah. So this is in like junior year of high school, like towards the end of my junior year. So I came out, and I started socially transitioning, at the age of 17. I I didn't do any social transition before, like when I was, thinking of myself as genderqueer. I kind of just like resonated with that privately. Um, I didn't really like talk about it or tell people to call me they, them, or anything like that. Um, but then with being trans, that all totally changed. It was super important to me. It was super important that people use my pronouns. Otherwise, I would get really mad at them. Even people who like knew me for years, like every time they called me she, it just felt like a slap in the face. And um, so yeah, I had troubles with passing because I wasn't on any hormones yet. And so because I had like really dedicated myself to the idea that I was literally born in the wrong body, I basically felt like, oh, I'm an 18-year-old guy trapped in a female body, and I have this high voice, and I don't like, I felt like I was cheated out of the puberty that I was supposed to go through. So there was like this sense of urgency, like I need to get on hormones so that I can, you know, look a little bit more my age. I had no idea how it was going to change me because I'd seen a lot of gender transformation videos and things like that before and afters. And it's like testosterone seems to have a wide variety of effects on young women. Some of them grow like a full beard, and some of them have a weird sounding voice. I did not know what was going to happen, but I was like, I still was willing to risk that, which is like kind of crazy to me to think about now. But yeah, so I went on testosterone like right out of high school. I was 18 years old, and yeah, I mean, by then, even before then, I was just like totally dedicated to the trans thing. It was pretty much the center of my life for like probably 3 or 4 years. Um, and then after a couple of years on testosterone, I sought out top surgery. My logic with that basically was that, again, I'm a guy. I don't need breasts. I shouldn't have breasts. Even though, like, sort of going back to my earlier life, going through puberty and developing breasts, like, that wasn't a very distressful thing for me. Like, it, I was kind of indifferent about it. And actually, like, I remember being in like fifth grade, and my mom, like, she bought me like my first little like trainer bra thing, and I remember wearing that and just like kind of like prancing around the house with no shirt on and just wearing the bra and looking in the mirror and being like just feeling like I look so grown up, which I guess I just totally disregarded that memory when I was going through the transition, because that would indicate someone who's probably not trans, but whatever. There were other signs that I was. And but yeah, so yeah, I had top surgery in 2018 when I was 20, because I wanted to stop wearing the binder and I wanted to be able to breathe freely. And I was, of course, under the assumption that I was going to be trans for the rest of my life. And so it just seemed like a perfectly logical thing to do. I knew that I wouldn't be able to breastfeed after the surgery, but I wasn't, I just did not care. Like, I did not care about that at the time because I was 20. I kind of wanted to have kids maybe sometime, you know? But I was like, at the time, I was totally willing to like do surrogacy or whatever, you know, find some kind of way to acquire a child. And I'm a man, so I obviously don't need to breastfeed. Obviously, I deeply regret that now, but I think that as upset as I am about that decision, I have to say I think it was pretty inevitable, just based on the era that I came to age in, you know, like 2015, 2013, you know, the 2010s, that's kind of when transgenderism kind of became a more mainstream issue, and I was chronically online and I was very depressed and I had, you know, weird gender feelings. So, you know, I've had some people say, just like people online say, like, how could someone do this? How could you actually do this to yourself? Like, this is, I know to a lot of people it's like really crazy. Um, and I get that, but when I think about all of the factors that led to me making the decisions that I made, um, it was pretty much inevitable, the way I see it. And I made the best decisions that, maybe not the best, but I made decisions based on the information and the resources that I had at the time. There, there really were no detransitioners that were public in 2015 when I started socially transitioning. So I didn't have that to consider. Um, but yeah, I was just very like gung ho about it and wanted to do it very fast, or as fast as I could, because I was very excited about it and I did enjoy it in a way. Like, I did enjoy indulging in that fantasy of being um, a guy and just like being read as a guy. Like, there was sort of this high that came from it, that came from the control that I felt like I had about the way that other people saw me. Um, and just the changes like really excited me. Um, like the physical changes that I saw. And yeah, no, so that's why I, you know, was trans for as long as I was, because I really did enjoy it. Yeah, the internet played a massive role. Like, I think if I did not have any access to social media somehow, like, I wouldn't have transitioned. It I have no doubt about that. I just I spent a lot of time online because I don't know, I'm an introvert and I felt like um you know, I was kind of addicted to it, just like the endless amount of entertainment and information. It was a good way for me to just like escape from real life and um kind of numb myself, honestly. And like I said, I spent a lot of time on Tumblr, but I also loved YouTube. I've always loved YouTube, and I started watching some like trans influencers, and there were not nearly as many as back then as there are now, but I, you know, there was still a lot. And yeah, I just really looked up to them and was kind of almost infatuated with them in a way, because they had this very like kind of cute, like uh they looked like, I don't know, like this sounds weird, but they looked like prepubescent boys. And for some reason, and I think this is a common phenomenon with like trans-identified females, is like we don't actually want to look like men necessarily, but we want to look like boys. Um, and a lot of them act sort of in a very like juvenile way. And I would say that I definitely fit into that category. So yeah, I just and they just seemed so happy like with all of the changes they were going through, and they seemed to want the changes to happen so desperately. And like I related a lot to how they felt, but I also didn't in some ways because my gender dysphoria was not really like physically focused. Like it was more of a social thing. Like I wanted people to see me as a guy, and it wasn't so much that like, oh, I hate my breasts or I hate my vagina. Like it wasn't really like that. Um, but again, I was also like, just the messaging around it is so like, there's no one right way to be trans. Like you can be trans and not even want to cross dress. Like you can be trans and change nothing about yourself, and like you're still 100% valid. And yeah, so it was kind of like, why would I question it if anyone can be trans and I'm having these feelings? And like it's probably a good idea. It's probably something that I need to do because again, the like suicide rhetoric with surrounding it. Um, and I didn't really know any trans people in real life at this time. It was all just like online, and I think I spent so much time online that it became almost more real to me than my real life. Whenever I turned 18, I started researching like what I need to do to get testosterone. And there was an informed consent route where you have to be 18, but you don't need a letter from a therapist or anything like that. You don't need to like go to therapy. Um, and so there was this clinic in Chicago. It wasn't Planned Parenthood. I'll just say it was Howard Brown. It's called Howard Brown. It's like an LGBTQ clinic in Chicago. And so I called them, and I I don't even remember what that phone call what I said exactly. I don't know if I was like just asking questions or if I was seeking out an appointment, but I did make an appointment. I did end up making an appointment um, from that phone call. And I do remember thinking like, oh crap, like that was really easy. Like, I don't know exactly what's going to happen at this appointment, but I have an appointment to like talk about hormones. Again, I didn't know I was going to get the hormones at this appointment, but yeah, so that day comes, and I'm really excited, and I go in and talked about like what my goals were with transition. And um yeah, I think they might have asked me like, do you have gender dysphoria, or like how long have you been I don't even know if they asked me that. Like I kind of looked the part. So they prescribed me testosterone on that day, and they actually had me do my first shot there because it's self-administered like injections, like with a needle in your thigh and stuff. So it's kind of a scary thing to do for the first time. I mean, it was kind of, I really didn't like doing it every time. But you know, they were like, you need to know how to do this. We can't just like send you home with this vial and needles. So I did my first shot there, and I think I paid like $60 for it. If you're wondering like how could I afford that, it wasn't expensive. And yeah, so it was just one appointment. It probably was no more than an hour long. But yeah,
Okay.
definitely not for people under 18. Whether or not it should be allowed for adults, that's I don't even know. Like people would probably consider that a really extreme position, but like uh I don't know. But for under 18, certainly it shouldn't be allowed. So, I mean, I was barely 18 when I acquired it, but like I was still like really immature and not like yeah, that was just I was way too young to make a decision like that. Well, I will say the whole time I was transitioning, I put a lot of pressure on myself to never regret it, which you really can't do that. Like you can't just say like, you know, if I regret like I don't know. I was just really scared that I was making the wrong decision. But I also like really wanted to like once I started, I was like you can't go back. And I really wanted to make sure I understood that. Um and even then like I just didn't because you can't look into the future and know what you're going to want and know what's going to be important to you. But anyway, I was terrified of the prospect of detransitioning for a long time. And then once I had like finished my transition, and the last thing that I did was after the top surgery, it was actually change my name on everything because I really procrastinated that. Um, and that kind of like put the cap on all of it. Like I was like, okay, I'm done. And I think shortly after that is when I started feeling just feelings of like, what would my life look like if I hadn't done any of this? And what would I look like physically if I hadn't done any of this? And it's like, gosh, I'll never know because I did it, but I really would like to know. And, when I was considering what my life would look like, it kind of was like, I don't know, I think my life might be better than it is right now. Um, because my dating pool is very, very small. Um, and just I feel like I don't really fit in anywhere. I don't feel camaraderie with guys. I don't feel camaraderie with girls. Girls don't see me as one of them. Some guys who didn't know that I was trans, like they kind of, assumed that I was male, but like I don't think they could relate to me at all just because I didn't quite look like a 21-year-old guy, and this is in like 2019. So I just start feeling really frustrated with just the just how I was feeling after transitioning and like the the excitement of it had worn off and my life was fine. Like I was in college and I had a job, but I was sort of aimless. Um, and I just felt so isolated. And outside of a social perspective, I internally just felt incomplete and like I could never be complete again. Um, because of just because of all of the changes. And it's like, yeah, at one point these changes were really exciting and made me really happy, but now I just feel incomplete and like, I I kind of realized like, oh, I'm like actually not supposed to look like this. Like I was born a certain way and my voice is not supposed to sound like this. My chest is not supposed to look like this. And these were really scary thoughts because that's what I told myself before when I was identifying as trans, is that I'm not supposed to be a girl, but it's like you are. And that fact stayed with me, obviously. Like, so yeah, I just kind of realized that I really didn't feel comfortable being this like hybrid of, kind of in between boy and girl, and just the fact that like my maleness was just always going to be up for debate. Like people would, I was like so exhausted of just like the political conversation surrounding it and how like just my existence is like so controversial. I'm not the kind of trans person that's like, or I wasn't the kind of trans person that was like, I'm gonna, be really involved in like protesting and like activism. Like, I just want to live my life. And so, yeah, that was exhausting. And the mental gymnastics and eventually anguish that came with the doubts and like, oh, am I gonna detransition? I can't. Like, I'm too far gone. Like, what am I gonna do? Um, but eventually, during the COVID lockdown actually, in like May of 2020, I, you know, progressively the doubts, I was starting to become more and more honest with myself. And um, there was one Thursday in May where I was taking my testosterone shots every Thursday, and there was one Thursday that came where I was just like, I can't do this. Like I can't. I was also thinking about having kids more. Even like I wasn't in a relationship or anything. It was something that, as I was like finishing up college, I was like, do I want to just like work in a, boring corporate job, or do I want to like have a family? It became much more important to me to like find a husband and have a family and have like a normal life. Like I didn't want to be a trans man. I didn't want to be a trans man anymore. Like it's really that simple. So um yeah, I basically decided, okay, I'm not gonna do my shot today. And that was it. Like I knew at that point, like, okay, I guess I'm detransitioning. And I was like so terrified because I didn't know if I would be able to find a partner now, being a woman with a deep voice and no breasts. Like just living my life as that was just very terrifying to me and just like sad and overwhelming. It's like, this is forever. Like these scars are forever. This voice is forever. But I just had to face it. And I was like devastated at first, but and I still do, deal with regret, and I still kind of have a hard time forgiving myself and like moving on. But in terms of like my comfort living as a woman, it's just like, I don't know, there's just a relief in it, it's not like, oh, I realized I'm actually cis, or I actually identify as like, it's just, it's just letting go of identity entirely. It's letting go of gender identity entirely and just being what you are, and knowing that like it's not up for debate, like it's not this big controversial thing. And, hey, like you can get pregnant. I didn't even know if I could get pregnant, but like I wanted to see if I could, and then, I could just be a pregnant woman and not a pregnant man. Like some people do that, and I'm like, how do you do that? But whatever. Um, so yeah, I like never looked back after that. And it was definitely what needed to happen. Um, And yeah, and then my life kind of went really fast because I met my husband like right away. And I was like, I originally was like not gonna date anyone, but then I met him and like, you know, he knew my situation and was gonna stand by me. So I was like, okay, I need to hold on to you. And so then we just like got married and like I just started getting pregnant. So it just that just happened really fast. My life is really wonderful, right? Like I am very grateful for my life. I'm really grateful that I have children, and that you know, I have no problem getting pregnant. My kids are 18 months apart. So, the breastfeeding thing, that is hard. But now, my daughter, she's like a month and a half, and I've kind of just gotten used to our routine, our feeding routine. So I try to not think about it because if I do, it'll just make me really sad. And it's like, there's nothing you can do. Like, it's just reality and the formula. She's doing fine on it and she's getting fed. And the formula I use is like the best formula in the world. So, like, I don't think about it. I try not to think about it. When she was born, it was so hard. For some reason, whenever my son was first born, like it was hard to, use the Infamil that the hospital had immediate like the first for his first feeding, like he's so fragile, like all I want to do is just like give him breast milk and breastfeed him. Like that's just what my body like desperately wants to do, and I just like absolutely cannot even try to. Um, and for some reason, that reality hit me way harder when I had my daughter. I really don't know why. Um, I don't know. Maybe it's just like I don't know. I don't know why it hit me harder. Um, but yeah, in the early days of infancy, it's definitely, I mean, that's just a really hard and emotional and sensitive time anyways, but with that on top of it, it was like I was just, yeah, it was really hard. I um I was I grew up Protestant. I had, I had a relationship with Jesus until I was like 13, and then I learned about hell and considered what that meant for people in my life who were not Christians, like my father. So that kind of pushed me away. This is also around the time when I started questioning my sexuality and I learned that like being gay was a sin. And just I became very afraid of hell and just feeling like God was no longer loving, and just the simple childlike, relationship that I had with Christ before just turned into something that, was different. And so I kind of just abandoned the faith for like 8 years. I went through all of high school just not really thinking about religion, just kind of doing my own thing and not really considering that. Um, and then fast forward to like the middle of my transition, I start like wanting to go to church again for some reason because I guess I became interested in religion from like an anthropological perspective almost, and just being very interested in like the way that different people worship and like different theologies and like different interpretations of scripture, and like how different people live. And I just became very interested in like the psychology of faith because I just started asking myself like, how do these people believe these things? And it wasn't in a way where it's like, how do people believe such crazy things? Like people are so gullible and brain, like, it wasn't like that. It was kind of just like an honest like almost like I wanted to have that level of faith. I just was like, I have no idea how. Like, I don't know what these people mean when they talk about like having a relationship with Jesus that like gives them so much fulfillment. Um, and I also just felt kind of locked out of it because I was trans and, I never really found a way to reconcile those two things together. And I was just kind of, I was going to different churches, but I would never like become a member of a church because I didn't want anyone to know like who I actually was. Um, so that was kind of a complicated and weird thing. And it was one of those things where I just kind of felt naturally pulled towards it. But I was like, why the heck am I like, what's my goal here? I don't really know. Um, and then when I detransitioned, like I was still really interested in that stuff, but I felt kind of like something had been lifted to where I'm no longer like afraid to go to church. I mean, I was kind of afraid to go out in public at that point in my life, but like I was no longer afraid to pursue Christianity. Like in a on a deeper level and actually like start reading scripture with like a very open heart and like praying while reading scripture. And I was like, I'm just gonna do this and like see what happens. And um, you know, something did happen. Like I just felt this overwhelming sense of peace whenever I would like go and pray and read scripture. And it was emotional and it was peaceful and it was intense at the same time. And I was just kind of overwhelmed with just information and just like I still really wanted to like acquire knowledge and like just understand and be able to interpret everything perfectly so that I knew exactly how to live my life based on this, you know, being a Christian. I was like, okay, I'm a Christian woman now. Like, what does that mean? Um, and then so then I met my husband and I was still like I was pretty like excited about the whole Christian thing because something very real was happening during prayer and um I actually felt like, oh, like I love Jesus. Like I I really feel like I know and am falling in love with Jesus. And like I would hear people say that before and be like, what the heck are you talking about? Like, I almost viewed Jesus as like a fictional character. Like just when you start to swallow that like, oh, the gospels actually like happened and they're not just stories and there's like a spiritual reality and it kind of just flattened me. So I was pretty excited about it. It was then the church question was like all of the churches I was going to just felt kind of performative, kind of like I don't know, like not all of them, but some of them just felt like, I was going to get like an uplifting surface level message that is maybe related kind of to like one verse in scripture. Um, and so, and then I kind of fell away again because I stopped praying. I stopped wanting to pray. I was not feeling repulsed by sin, which is what a lot of Christians told me that I should be feeling if I am really saved. And I kind of fell into this like very, very like, I guess, Calvinist theology. And I just was like, I guess I'm not saved because I mean, whatever happened, like that felt really real, but I guess it wasn't because I don't feel like praying. I like sleeping with my boyfriend. Like I'm not repulsed by sin. Um, and my faith just kind of started to weaken again because the initial excitement started to wear off. Um, and so I was just kind of like, instead of like fighting through it and still like pursuing Christ, even if I don't like, feel like it, I kind of just was like, well, I guess I'm not saved. And then I became very discouraged and just did not want to talk about God anymore. My husband still wanted to have these like theological conversations, but I almost became like hostile towards them because was, I was just like sad about it. I was like, well, this clearly isn't for me. Like, I'm just clearly just wicked and, I'm just damned and there's nothing I can do about it. Like, I'm not part of the elect, whatever. Um, and then when I was like 8 months pregnant with my first child, I started asking myself, like, how do I want to raise him? Like, in terms of religion, I want him to know about it. I want him to have kind of the same upbringing that I had, um, or at least similar in a sense that like I want him to go to church and to learn about Christianity because I still at this time I was like I still think Christianity is good. Like I still think it is better to be a Christian than to not be a Christian. I just, I can't be because my faith isn't strong enough and I'm just, not part of the elect. Um, but I was like, like let's just pick a church and we'll just start going together and then we'll bring Gabriel and he'll learn about Jesus and it'll be great. And I can worry about my own spiritual journey like some other time. Like that's not important right now. Like I just, not everything's about me anymore. Um and if I don't believe and like Gabriel asks me, like I'll probably just give some kind of pluralistic answer to his questions. Um, but then when Gabriel was like 4 months old, so we were going to an Episcopal church, which I was attracted to because I was attracted to um, the fact that they have an actual liturgy, and I think um, I became more drawn to like more high church denominations. And I don't know, they just seemed a little bit more what's I don't what's the word? I don't know. Like I don't want to say dignified because I don't want to sound like a total snob, but yeah, like just a little bit more um serious and just connected to tradition and history. Um, And so I was going to this Episcopal church and they had communion, but it was open communion. And I was like, I started like kind of looking at like, okay, so this is like kind of Catholic, but I didn't really know much about Catholicism at this point. I always really loved being in Catholic churches. And I would honestly have like an intense emotional response when I was in like a very beautiful Catholic church, like for years before that. But I was just like, I'm not Catholic, so like, I'm not just gonna become Catholic because I like stained glass windows, like, um, but yeah, but I wanted to go to the Episcopal Church because it was similar to Catholicism. The only difference is that they're like pretty progressive, which I was confused by because like I don't know. I was just kind of confused on like what does the Episcopalian Church believe? Like what is their doctrine, if any? Um, and my husband and I we started talking about Catholicism and like kind of we didn't talk about it at all before, but my husband actually is the one that brought it up first, and I kind of was like, oh yeah, like I definitely interested in that. It's just I don't know anything about it. Like I know that they believe all this like, you know, Mary stuff and the saints and they pray to saints and I don't know how I'll ever like do that and like they believe in like all of this stuff that's not in the Bible and I went from being like a Calvinist, reformed, sola scriptura type of Christian to then to nothing to then uh Catholic. Um so yeah, basically we just started going to mass um together and actually sat down with the pastor at the Episcopal church and asked him all of my questions, everything that I wanted to know about like what Episcopalians believe about like the Eucharist and the Eucharist was a big deal for me because like eventually when I asked him to describe like what is the difference between the Eucharist with what you guys think about it versus what Catholics believe about it, why is it that everyone can take communion? Like at first, that was really like I thought that was a good thing because they used phrases like this is God's table. We don't get to decide who can receive it. And I'm like, yeah, like who's to say, like it's yeah. But then it's just like, well, then what am I doing? Like, am I just eating a cracker? Like, am I just eating a cracker and then like meditating on Christ's passion? Like, that was kind of my understanding of it. Like, it was just a symbol again, which is how, the Protestant church that I grew up going to view the Eucharist is that it's a symbol. But with Episcopalians, I was like, okay, it's something a little bit more than just a symbol. But like like I didn't really get an answer from the pastor that made a lot of sense to me. And not to say that like the real presence doctrine made sense to me just in a like it did make sense, but it also was just like again, how do I like that's such a bold act of faith. Like I remember when I learned about what Catholics believe about the Eucharist for the first time, and I was just like, and I think it was even long before I considered coming Catholic, but I was just like, what? They believe that? That's like not insane, but I remember just thinking like that's such an amazing and bold statement of faith. Like I had no idea that they really believed that. Like that's a lot. Like no wonder non-Catholics can't receive communion. Like that doctrine just kind of amazed me. But yeah, so eventually it was kind of just like, okay, I want the real thing. Like this doesn't really feel like the real thing. It feels like it's dressed up as the real thing. And I loved the people at that church. They were so nice and I started to like make friends there, but eventually I kind of was like, I'm not sure I should be taking communion here because I want to find it in me to have enough faith to believe in the real presence. And like, I don't know exactly what got me believing in God again. I think it probably was going to church. I think that like a lot of good came from me attending that Episcopalian church for like, was it like 5 months? But once I decided that I was, wanting to potentially become Catholic, I felt like I just could not continue to go there because of the whole communion thing. Like I remember the last time I went, we were in line for communion and I was just like going back and forth in my head, like, should I take it? Should I not take it? Like, I don't know what I believe. I don't know. And so I ended up not taking it. I ended up just getting a blessing. And then it's kind of like the detransition thing. It's like, oh, should I take my shot? Should I not? And then once I decide not to take it, I'm like, okay, I guess I know what the path is that I want to take. And I was just so excited to learn everything about the church because it feels like real church history, it's goes all the way back, and it's so rich and just beautiful. And there were a lot of things that I like struggled with, just because I again like went from being a sola scriptura Christian to like um being Catholic, and like learning about things like the Assumption of Mary. I'm like, where do people get that? Like, that's not in the Bible. Um, and just, yeah, just all of the like, all of it was just very like interesting and beautiful to me, but also just very new and just very foreign. Um, Catholic theology is just so like systematic and specific and logical. Like, it's very much based on logic, and um I kind of appreciated that it went beyond scripture, because scripture on its own is like impossible to interpret in one way. Like, you know, it's everyone who reads scripture has to rely on their own interpretation of it. Like, even if they think that it's true or it's clearly saying this, it's like you're only relying on yourself. And it's like, I like the idea of, there being saints and doctors of the church who um, perhaps were gifted with this, like, this knowledge or this like holy intuition that we can rely on to live our lives. And it's just so beautiful. Like, it's just a very beautiful faith that I fell in love with. And, you know, like, I'm just so glad that I'm Catholic. Like, there are times when my faith weakens, there are times where my faith is really strong, but through it all, like, I am Catholic. Like, I am a part of this family. And my relationship with God and with Christ has just um, reached levels that it's never reached before. And yeah, and so we all were baptized as a family almost exactly a year ago, at last year's Easter Vigil. And I received my first communion and was confirmed, um, all in one night. So it was a very spiritually powerful night.